This is apropos. Panicked consumers in hard-hit Asia are increasingly turning to rooftop solar power as energy costs soar due to the war in the Middle East. Sales have also been ticking up here in Europe as households and businesses seek to limit their exposure to higher fuel prices. August Atkinson has the story.
When we got our energy bill after the Iran war broke out, we were very shocked. It was, wow, it was a significant increase.
For Jamie Quamado, turning to solar energy became both a natural and crucial step. The Philippines is among the countries hardest hit by the current global fuel crisis.
There was a lot of news that there were threats of looming power outages. So we decided to look at an alternative source of energy, which is solar, which is very abundant here in the Philippines.
Last month, the president declared a state of national energy emergency, saying the war in Iran has created an imminent danger of critically low energy supply.
People and businesses are in panic, and they're turning to rooftop solar for energy security.
A climate nonprofit recently surveyed 20 local solar companies. It found weekly installations had increased by 70% and that customer inquiries had jumped sixfold since the start of the conflict. But it's not just happening here. Other Southeast Asian nations, including Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand, are also ramping up their solar initiatives. And the world's leading provider of solar technology, China, stands to benefit significantly from a boom that shows no signs of slowing down.
Let's take a closer look at how conflict-driven energy price shocks are accelerating solar adoption across Asia. We're joined in studio now by Maria-Eugenia Sanin, economics professor at Université Paris-Est Créteil. Thanks so much for being with us on the programme, for coming in to speak with us this evening. Tell us firstly, Maria, why are Asian economies particularly vulnerable here when it comes to these global oil and gas price shocks, and which are seeing the biggest jump in solar adoption?
Well, actually, they are very exposed because most of the oil that they were importing was coming from that strait. And so global markets are, since this is a global commodity, prices spike everywhere, but they are in direct risk of shortage. And the alternative, which is renewable energy, is also cheaply provided by their neighbor, which is China.
And do you think this surge in demand, is it a temporary reaction to what we're seeing in the Middle East, or is this part of a longer-term structural shift, do you think?
So I think it's since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, afterwards we've seen this Maduro's extraction. We have this, we've been in this continuum of shocks in the oil and gas markets. And so fossil fuel markets are extremely volatile, and it doesn't seem to come to a halt. So investors are indeed very drawn towards renewables because indeed there are several papers that show that when geopolitical tensions increase, the attractiveness for investors in financial markets towards renewables increases, particularly for solar. And this is the case because solar is, the scale is lower. And so even if there is this inflationary impacts that oil has on the whole economy, which impacts also interest rates that are high, since solars are of small scale, the financial implications, so the financing is less a barrier. Whereas, for example, for windmills, those are big infrastructure projects, and so the fact that interest rates are high may be a barrier.
And you know, during this conflict, we've been talking a lot, obviously not so much about the environment, but about national security, about sovereignty. Is renewable energy really coming to the fore as something that is as much about national security as protecting the environment? And are we kind of seeing some kind of change in how the governments around the world are treating all of this?
Absolutely. So we've been seeing here in Europe the announcements regarding electrification strategies using electrifying usage like transportation, increase subsidies for electrification in general. And so this is very much about increasing what we call security of supply in Europe, and somehow this is something that is also relevant for countries that do not have oil in Asia, as you were mentioning.
And some critics might say that all of this raises other potential problems when it comes to China, like, for example, that the rest of the world could start becoming overly reliant on it when it comes to solar panels and when it comes to renewable energy. Is that a view that you would share? Do you see that there's something to be feared there, perhaps?
Well, there are several experts around the world that share the opinion I'm about to give you, which is that we don't need to be independent in the whole value chain of everything. And this is particularly true in the case of renewables and very true in the case of solar panels. We don't need to be able to produce as competitively as the Chinese industry has done the production of solar panels, because once we install the panel, we can produce electricity which cannot be storable or shippable around the world, and this increases our affordability of energy for the whole population. This increases competitiveness of the industry, because electricity produced from renewables has a very low marginal costs. And what can be done, so with this sovereignty of producing our own electricity on a daily basis, we can also pursue sovereignty in a different size of the whole value chain, in the sense that we could learn how to extend the life cycle of those panels, how to better use them, how to better interconnect the whole grid, introduce batteries, and what we've been trying to do with the Critical Raw Materials Act here in Europe, which is increase the whole circularity of the value chain with recycling more materials, reusing, and reshuffling in general, for example, for batteries.
And Maria, we've spoken an awful lot over the last couple of months about the markets, about oil prices. What do you think this crisis is teaching us about the volatility of commodity markets and how reliant they seem to be on such a very small number of players?
That is very true. Indeed, I think we haven't seen the end of it, because we are still using some of strategic reserves. For example, for oil, we've seen this, but stocks are going to start running out. And if the crisis goes on, which it doesn't seem to we don't see an end for the moment, this is going to get probably worse. So this will generate, and is already generating, this long-term trend towards divesting from fossil fuels, but this time for security of supply issues and for affordability issues. So we really need to actually get this security of supply, because there are always commodities in the line, different ones, but always different types of materials. We need to diversify our providers and try to also diversify the things we need in different parts, in different links of the value chain.
And Maria, a cynic might ask if, the likes of China, if they're genuinely transitioning to clean energy here, or if they're simply trying to diverse away from those more volatile fossil fuel markets. What would your view be about that?
I think that China is mostly trying to get self-sufficiency, and on the other hand, it is true that they are somehow using their coal to transition out of oil, and eventually they will succeed in, only time will tell, but eventually they are somehow transitioning out of oil before transitioning out of coal, right?
And how do you think if this, let's imagine, we don't know what is actually going to happen when it comes to the stalemate currently in the Middle East, but how are Asian economies a little more broadly going to adapt if this crisis continues for months or even for years?
I think we are going to continue. It's very difficult to predict, especially with the administration we have in the US right now. It's very difficult to look into the future. But I think that uncertainty is not decreasing, but is an increasing factor. And therefore, I would guess that Asian economies are going to adapt, transitioning to renewables as much as possible, divesting from oil. And this also will have an impact on financial markets and even on the dollar versus yuan equation.
Maria, we'll have to leave it there for now. Thanks so much, though, for coming into us in studio tonight. That's Maria-Eugenia Sanin, economics professor at Université Paris-Est Créteil. Thanks so much for being with us tonight.